RNC and Trump with than two former members of the Trump administration, who thankfully are no longer supporters of Donald J. Trump. Sarah Matthews served as the former president's White House deputy press secretary and campaign spokesperson until she resigned shortly after the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. In her resignation statement, Sarah said, "Our nation needs a peaceful transfer of power." Olivia Troy, on the other hand, quit her job in the administration many months before the January 6th attack. At the time, she served as advisor to former Vice President Mike Pence on counterterrorism and homeland security. She was also a member of the White House coronavirus task force until she left her position in July of 2020. Olivia quit over Trump's response to the pandemic that he was praising himself for at the RNC on Thursday night. Olivia, Sarah, thank you for joining me on Mehdi Unfiltered. Sarah, let me start with you. Watching your former boss in Milwaukee on stage, was that a new tone for you?
So we saw a new tone from Trump that maybe lasted the first 10 or 15 minutes of his speech. Look, him recounting his near-death experience with the attempted assassination was gripping. And it was his first time telling the American people the story from his perspective on air. And there was a little bit of unity there. He said that he was going to be a president for not half of America, but all Americans. But the unity that we were promised from the Trump campaign quickly faded as we got later into the speech, where he started saying things like crazy Nancy Pelosi, Democrats cheat in the elections. He said that all the investigations against him were witch hunts. And it seemed like he was reverting to his usual campaign rally speech. And it wasn't that inspiring. I didn't really hear a vision for the American people or him talking about the problems that they are facing. And it seemed to just be all about him. And so I think that the unifier that we were promised lasted for, like I said, 10 or 15 minutes. And then Trump is always going to be Trump and revert to his old ways.
Olivia, 10 to 15 minutes of a 90-minute speech. It was an epically long speech. I wanted to go to bed, and he wouldn't stop going. You worked for the man. Were you surprised when, I don't know, Hannibal Lecter made an appearance from the campaign rallies? Because a lot of journalists, not me, but a lot of journalists were like, oh, we didn't expect this. We were told he was going to be unifying. You worked for the man. Were you surprised?
No, not at all. I mean, actually, I was actually disappointed that he didn't bring in the sharks into the conversation.
Yes, we missed
because I was really looking forward to that. I mean, he would have been better off singing Baby Shark, and that would have unified the country more behind it, of being like sick of getting the song stuck in our heads. But no, it was exactly what I expected. I think the entire week was a manufactured performance for him. Yes, do I think that it was a traumatic event? Yeah, that would be for anyone. But, you know, he goes completely off the rails, and then it was just one lie after another. And I'll say this, there was a portion of the speech that made me wince. And that was when he referred to COVID as the China virus.
Yep.
And that point in particular, Mehdi, really bothered me because I had flashbacks to sitting in the White House, my conversations with former Vice President Mike Pence about saying, please don't use that term. Because when you use that term, you're increasing bias and hate crimes against Asian Americans.
Yeah.
Trump was told the same thing. I'm sure Sarah's aware of this on staff. So hearing that, I was like, really? This is unity? This is unity after you have actually had an assassination attempt. And this is what you're pushing out to the American public? Something that's going to radicalize people again, bringing that back into the conversation? That, to me, just was a wrap for me. I mean, that was it. Summarizes Trump in a nutshell.
Yeah. Sarah, as someone who has warned against the authoritarian threat from Donald Trump, I don't know about you, but I was wincing, to use Olivia's phrase, when I watched a crowd full of people shout, fight, 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 with fists raised, some of them holding mass deportation signs. It doesn't scream to me as president of all the country. It tells me that actually those of us who are worried about an authoritarian presidency come 2025 have a lot to be worried about.
Yeah, I found one of the most kind of shocking moments to me during the speech was when Trump claimed that he is the one who's actually saving democracy.
Yes.
And gave me quite a chuckle. Because we know from looking at Project 2025 what his plans are for a second Trump term and how he would upend our democracy as we know it. And then, as you mentioned, seeing the signs in the crowd that are saying mass deportations and calling for things like that, that's not a quite unifying message either. And so I just found it hilarious that it seemed like some in the media took the bait from the Trump campaign, where they said that he ripped up the old speech and that it was going to be this unifying message and that he was a changed man. And what we saw on display is that, sure, did this experience probably change him in some ways? I have to imagine that coming that close to death would. But at the end of the day, Trump is still Trump. And I think that moving forward, he's still going to use the same dangerous rhetoric that we've seen from him in his campaign rallies. And I don't think that his platform has changed that much.
So, Olivia, on the subject of platform and policy, I mean, Sarah rightly brought up Project 2025, which people are rightly worried about. Question to you, though. We talk a lot about policy, but with Trump, the bigger problem always is not policy. It's actually him personally, as a person, and the people he surrounds himself with. Yes. I've been talking to a lot of people who say, well, we survived one term of Trump, we can survive another. And it's like, but there's not going to be a Rex Tillerson or a Jim Mattis or a Mike Pence who I've criticized a lot, but on January 6th, at least he did what J.D. Vance says he wouldn't do. J.D. Vance, the new running mate, has said he would have done what Trump asked him to do. Those people won't be there. There'll be a lot of really extreme people. We're talking about General Michael Flynn possibly returning to the cabinet. We're talking about, the Kash Patels of this world, very extreme people. And we saw at this RNC, we saw convicted criminals like Peter Navarro on stage. We saw Paul Manafort walking around the convention hall. Donald Trump was introduced by Dana White, a man who's on tape hitting his partner. Kid Rock, Hulk Hogan, all of whom have used the N-word. I mean, these are not very nice people. They're kind of people who push dangerous rhetoric. They're the kind of people who make threats against people they don't like. What has that been like for you as someone who turned against Trump? When you see people say, well, it'll be fine, we'll survive 4 more years.
It's incredibly frustrating. And I'll tell you this, I worked with a lot of incredible people that were there to try and do the right thing in the first Trump administration. But what I saw over time was people changed and people transformed. And people started to fall in line. And so when I hear, I hear a lot of talk about democracy and authoritarianism, and I do hear those comments from people, even, think tank people, academics who say, but the public service and others, people will hold the line. Well, I'm concerned about that because people eventually, it's fear. It's fear about being persecuted against. It's fear about becoming a target. It's fear about what is going to happen with that executive order that I saw the draft, I know many others saw the draft of, when it comes to personnel across the government, where they were going to start installing loyalists and removing all the policy people, Schedule F, which is embedded into Project 2025, yes. Right? There are a lot of policies that were done in the Trump administration that were started that are engulfed in that plan. So regardless of whether they want to distance from it or not, those authors were there the first time around. They were already trying to do it. What they did was they learned the lessons from the first time around, and now they know how to more effectively do it and remove the roadblocks and the people out of the way. So that's my concern in terms of that space, because the authors of that plan are former members of Trump's cabinet. They're senior officials. They're people that were in those policy meetings. They're the people that have the pen when it comes to what they're actually going to do to this country. And one thing that really, I got to say, makes me irate is watching people like the Heritage Foundation and say, oh, the left, oh, the libs, all of that. No. It's moderate conservatives like myself, moderate, rational conservatives like Sarah and others. We all have a problem with this plan. Yeah. We know what this is.
Very good point. And Sarah, Olivia mentioned people falling into line. And that makes me think of a certain running mate of Donald J. Trump, a man who once called Trump America's Hitler, called him an idiot, called him reprehensible. J.D. Vance on stage this week, being applauded, being praised by Donald Trump on Thursday night. He's now loyal, 100% MAGA. He is the vice president. People are talking about him as the heir apparent. What do you make of J.D. Vance? Should we be worried about him because he is now a dangerous MAGA ideologue who says, I would have overturned the election? Or is it, he's just an opportunist. He doesn't believe this stuff.
Look, I am an Ohioan, so I know J.D. Vance well. And I believe that Trump picked him because he wanted someone who would be an attack dog for him and who wouldn't push back on him, who would not be a Mike Pence. He obviously, Mike Pence was loyal up until he wasn't, until the very end when Trump asked him to go against the Constitution and try to overturn the election. and Mike Pence wouldn't go along with it. But we've heard that J.D. Vance says he wouldn't have done what Mike Pence did on January 6th. And so I think that, sure, J.D. Vance is an opportunist. We've heard all of his comments during the 2016 election cycle and how he probably really feels about Trump deep down. And I think that being an opportunist is almost more alarming because he's willing to say or do anything. Look, he's a first-term senator, and now he's a vice presidential nominee pick. And so he's going to be willing to do anything to cling to power. And I think that it's very dangerous to see because he is a very smart man. And so I think he's played the game well to be in the position that he's in now.
Oh, he has. He's not even yet 40 years old. Olivia, let's talk about Mike Pence briefly, because you and I had many discussions when I was at MSNBC, and I was very critical of Mike Pence. I remain very critical of Mike Pence. But he did two things, which I will give him props for. One is on January 6th, he didn't do what Trump asked him to do, at the risk to his own family.
Yes.
And then he hasn't endorsed Donald Trump for re-election. His own vice president, unprecedented in American political modern history, for the vice president to say, well, I'm not going to endorse the guy. Okay, he said some BS, it's about his abortion position, whatever. We all know why he didn't endorse him again. And yet you have J.D. Vance now in position. I've got to ask you about them. As someone who worked for Mike Pence, you talk about going irate. I'm going mad watching the media coverage of J.D. Vance from the New York Times and all the cable. Shouldn't every story about J.D. Vance begin with, well, he has to have a new running mate because the last guy almost got killed and refused to run with him again? Isn't that the core story here that we're missing?
That's the story, that this is unprecedented, that the fact that he had to go get somebody else because his own supporters tried to kill what would have been his running mate, right? Because he wouldn't go along with the coup. He wouldn't go along with the plot that everyone wanted him to do. But to your point, and to Sarah's point, my biggest concern about J.D. Vance is that he is the future of the Republican Party. And so, the story here is that for people like me and others who have been wanting to right the course of the party, because I think it's better for the country to have two functioning parties instead of whatever circus we have going on right over here on the right, I'll say that this is worrisome to me because this pretty much puts like the nail in the coffin that this is the party of Trumpism, that this movement is here for a longer term, and we are going to have to figure out how to navigate it. And so I worry about J.D. Vance. He will be a loyalist till the very end. So I think we need to be vigilant about what's happening in this upcoming election, because I guarantee you that he will go to the end of the earth to make sure that they push whatever agenda it is they want in terms of it.
Just on a side note, I've been waiting for Democrats to say, if the vice president has the power to overturn the election, are you all okay with Kamala Harris deciding who wins on January 6th, 2025? No one ever points out that the current vice president is not a Republican, so be careful what you wish for. On that note, Olivia, very quickly, before we run out of time, I've got to ask, you've been spending some time with the vice president, I believe, in Michigan. You've done events with her. Do you believe she's ready to step up, take over from Joe Biden, and lead the Democrats to victory over Donald Trump from behind in the polls, which is where they are right now?
We did an event in Michigan, and it was an event to do outreach to conservative and Republican women. I will tell you that it was a very powerful event, and the feedback that I've gotten was that it was very well received. I've heard from Republican women who thought it was very well done. They felt like they were being welcomed into the fold when it comes to women's rights. I do believe that conservative women, at the end of the day, women are going to stick by women. We're going to stand by each other, and we're going to get through this together. And what I saw was someone that really connected with the crowd, connects with people. She's very strong on policy. She's very eloquent. And so do I think she can beat Trump? Yes, absolutely. When you have him up there talking about swinging around with sharks and windmills and Hannibal, we did get the Hannibal, I think.
We did get Hannibal Lecter, yes.
When you have him talking about that, and she's actually talking about real policy that affects Americans on an everyday basis, I think that is where you'll see her truly shine. But right now, it is a Biden-Harris ticket. So that is where we are right now, and that's where I am on it.
It's moving fast. By the time this airs, maybe it's not a Biden-Harris ticket. Sarah, do you think Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump, your former boss?
Well, if you look at the polling, it does not look like at this point in the race that Joe Biden can defeat Donald Trump. And I'm worried that he's not going to be able to be out there on the campaign trail and prosecute the case against Trump. Look, obviously his team is saying that he had a bad night at the debate, but doing a couple of TV interviews isn't going to clean that mess up, because the issue that voters have with him is his age, is his ability to serve another 4 years. And you can't defeat Father Time. And so I don't see a strategy in which that they can overturn the outcome that the polls are showing right now. And right now it looks like that Trump would beat Biden in a landslide. And so for someone who truly believes that democracy is on the line in this election, I really hope that Biden is taking the weekend to think about his place in history, because right now it's looking like he's going to be a one-term president. And so he can be a one-term president who decides to go out with honor, or he can be a one-term president who risks the very democracy that he swore to protect. I'm not saying that he can't win. Yeah. I've even publicly stated that I will vote for Joe Biden in the next in 2024. But the thing is, I'm a Republican, and I'm talking to a lot of other fellow Republicans who are on the fence, and they're worried about his age. And so I just think that when you see someone like Trump who projects strength, and it appears like Joe Biden is projecting weakness, that maybe there needs to be a change in the ticket. And I think that Kamala Harris, who is getting dismissed by some in the Democratic Party, actually would be a formidable opponent against Trump. And I think the idea of a contested election, also not the worst idea ever either. Imagine the media coverage that would garner. It would suck all the oxygen out of the room compared to competing against Trump, who typically is the person to do that. And so I think that it actually could benefit Democrats in that way. And voters are just so desperate for anyone other than the two options that they are currently being presented with, that another opponent would, I think, actually have a fighting chance against Trump.
And I think you said contested election. I'm sure you meant contested convention. But yes, I don't think you want a contested election. We all want to avoid that. Just to end, I got to ask, I've interviewed you both before individually and asked you this question before, but I want to ask here, especially because we're in a very different moment right now, especially for our Zeteo viewers watching at home, who might look at this panel and say, well, you two were part of the problem. Both of you worked for Donald Trump when a lot of the rest of us were saying, you know, Sarah just said you're going to vote for Joe Biden in 2024. A lot of people at home are saying, well, we voted against Trump in 2016 and 2020. How did you guys get it so wrong? What regrets do you have? Just briefly, Sarah and then Olivia.
I think that no matter who you work for, you're never going to agree with them 100% of the time. And I knew that full well that I never went to go work for Donald Trump because I believed in the man. I was there for the institution to serve the American people, and because I believed in the policy, majority of the policies, I should clarify, that we carried out. But I never fully supported him and his character and his rhetoric. And so, sure, I have being a spokesperson for him in particular, I have regrets about the things that I defended, because when you're a spokesperson for a politician, it's their name on the door. And so that is your job, to defend everything they say or do. And so looking back on some of the things that I defended, I'm not necessarily proud of. But I think that when the time came after he refused to accept the election result and disrupted the peaceful transfer of power on January 6th, I broke with him, and since then have been an outspoken critic and have been trying to do everything I can moving forward to ensure that Donald Trump never steps foot in the Oval Office again.
Yes, you have. Olivia, last word.
Yeah, look, I mean, I have said this publicly, and I'll say it again. I don't know that you can go into the Trump administration, and especially, you know, I started at DHS. I lived the travel ban firsthand. I had to work on the travel ban. I worked on a lot of really complicated executive orders. And then I went to the Trump White House, right? And I worked for Mike Pence. I don't think that you can be in that situation and not be complicit in some way. You're going to pick your battles. You're going to figure out how to navigate it. I have to tell you that towards the end, when I, by that point, had seen so many things that I found just very hard to palate and swallow and get through, I did have conversations with myself and said, okay, I just want to quit today. Today is the day that I'm done. And then, but when I saw people around me leave, there were loyalists, complete loyalists that would come in and backfill him, and it was making things that much harder. And it was a constant conversation with myself. Am I helping? Am I helping to push back on this, or am I enabling? And that was a conversation probably that I had every single day, Mehdi, honestly. Like, yeah. And it's hard to have that moral kind of conversation with yourself. And so I think, you know, I'm in the camp like of doing everything I can to right the wrongs in the past. You know, it's unprecedented probably as well to have someone go from Vice President Mike Pence's staff to going and being on stage with Vice President Kamala Harris, who's a completely
And I know you get a lot of hate
opposite.
for it.
I do. And I get it from the left. I think we get it from the left and we get it from the right. I'm very much getting it from the right. And I will tell you, just to be very candid with you, in the past couple days, I have gotten some really ugly, misogynistic, racist messages that are on a different level. And so that should tell you about the dynamics in this country.
Yeah.
And, what it's like to be someone coming from Mike Pence's staff to be on stage with Vice President Kamala Harris, who I have tremendous respect for as well, and in the aftermath of what happened.
We'll have to leave it there. Olivia, Troy, Sarah Matthews, do stay safe, and thank you for speaking out. Thank you both for coming on Mandy Unfiltered today.